Hello, once again, all you lovely people. Professor Gray here. We're going to continue on today with our little walk through utilitarianism and its limits. As always, recall that utilitarianism is an ethical theory that is particularly concerned with the promotion of the greater good. The greater good. And after that last module, I think we have a nice sense now about what, the greater good, seems to look like for utilitarianism. Again, it's the greater good, for the group, the collective, society, however you want to conceive the group that applies. But again, it's for the people involved, and then that good for that group is found by aggregating or summing up or collecting somehow the good of all the individual people involved. So I have my good, you have your good, and then we are good, then is just the sum of that, which then, guides our decision making. And in the last module, we saw this kind of sum ranking consequentialist approach that utilitarianism embodies. It creates some problems, to say the least. And on most of these problems, if we collected together, I think you might say, fair enough, that these are all problems that seem to be about justice, and that utilitarianism and justice don't seem to work very well together. That utilitarianism allows injustice to happen, which we don't seem to like. And at this point, I think it is helpful to pause and think, well, what do you mean by justice? What do I mean by justice? What do we mean by justice? This is a word thrown out a lot, but it's what does that even mean? I mean, pause for a moment. What do you think justice involves? When I say justice here, I've been saying it now several times, what's popping into your head? What ideas or what concerns are popping into your head when we talk about the word justice, when we just say it? What are we thinking about? And when I ask students this, I often get a very wide variety of responses, but I'll just kind of distill down what I tend to hear. Things like, legal rights, like a right to a fair trial or something. Maybe moral rights, like rights not to be harmed. All these types of legal and moral rights seem to be fundamental when we talk about justice. Also with justice, we sometimes hear words about, getting what you deserve. So that's the desert or fairness of the actions involved. That seems, justice seems to involve a sense of fairness. When we talk about justice, sometimes we think about contractual obligations. If you sign a contract, you're supposed to do it. And, contractual obligations are sometimes just like, they're basically promises, right? You're saying you will or will not do something, and I promise, and then maybe formally you sign a piece of paper. But when we make promises, that is an obligation as well, though it's informal. And other ideas that seem to come up when we talk about justice are ideas of, say, impartiality or equality, impartiality where, the judge makes the decision by both without bias or malice or anything like that, but makes, an impartial decision. And maybe that's a fair decision. These words just kind of combine. And then, of course, we have notions of justice as equality, equal before the law, or everyone has equal rights, or whatever. But all these ideas, that's quite the hodgepodge that you can see there. But these all seem to kind of reflect ideas we have about justice, and it kind of shows what a messy concept justice is. And we might wonder, how might these all come together to form what we might call justice? And then Mill, by the end of this module, will try to do that. Whether you like it or not, it's another story. But I want to focus on the deeper concern, is that we have these ideas about justice, but in the end, it seems that these ideas seem to contradict or go against what utilitarianism seems to want us to do. Again, especially when we look at the consequentialism and sum ranking utilitarianism. Just recall all those examples we saw in the last module. The example of breaking a promise to a friend. It seems, maximizing utility says to break the promise, but that seems to violate, that informal contract or promise that you had with your friend, and that seems wrong. Or we had the example of the newly elected president breaking a promise not to torture. That seems, again, to, by breaking a promise, seems to violate this kind of informal contractual obligation that justice cares about. But also, perhaps there's some legal or moral rights that torture violates. Maybe even criminals and terrorists have rights that cannot be violated. Provocative, but I don't think it sounds crazy. You just might disagree with that. That's fine too. But either way, it seems like justice is involved with whether or not we should torture. But utilitarianism says, if it maximizes the good, do it. We saw the example of harming an innocent person to prevent even greater harm to other people. That seems to violate our notions of, of desert and fairness. It's not fair to hurt an innocent person. It's not, that person doesn't deserve it. Or we had the example of violating the right to privacy of an unknown victim where the pervert is watching the woman undress. Yeah, that seems to violate some legal and probably moral rights to privacy, as the whole example itself suggests. And then even if we're looking at omelos, that seems to also violate our notions of fairness by, unfairly allowing this child to suffer, but also might violate maybe equality, that this child is equal to everyone else. So why does this child have to suffer so much more just so the city may flourish? We saw the example of Jim and the indigenous people. That seems to violate our notions of fairness. That's not cool. That's not just to put Jim in this awful position where Jim has to weigh these lives in a way that Jim has nothing to want to do with. It seems manifestly unjust that utilitarianism wants Jim to sacrifice his integrity, to promote the plans of this evil, captain who wants to execute these people. Now, John Stuart Mill, he was aware of these challenges. He was a very smart utilitarian, and he knew that people thought utilitarianism and justice might not mix. So jump to the text, jump to page, it's right the first sentence of first paragraph, actually. Page 216, right at the beginning of the reading on page 216, John Stuart Mill says, "In all ages of speculation, one of the strongest obstacles to the reception of the doctrine that utility or happiness is the criterion of right and wrong," good old utilitarianism. Yeah, the obstacle has been drawn from the idea of justice, the powerful sentiment, again, kind of emotional, the powerful sentiment, the powerful emotion, and apparently clear perception, which that word recalls with a rapidity and certainty resembling an instinct, have seemed to a majority of thinkers to point to an inherent quality in things, as justice just seems so powerful, so fundamental, an inherent quality of things, to show that the just must have an existence in nature as something absolute, generically distinct from every variety of the expedient, and an idea opposed to it. Now, by the expedient, he is talking about utility, utilitarianism, and he's just saying, yeah, people seem to think that justice is pretty different from utility, and that's the central problem this chapter. Mill wants to address that. He wants to think about, is justice inherently in conflict with utility or happiness, utilitarianism, right? Because after all, in that passage, Mill is saying that it seems that according to common sense, right, that justice is different, justice is distinct from utility, and that justice is more basic, more fundamental than utility, or that justice, because of its basic fundamentalness, is more important, has more priority than utility. So on all these things, again, justice is different. Justice is more basic. Justice is more fundamental, more priority than utility. And so Mill does agree. He says, yeah, I think people do. And he's going to want to explain why. And we will see this by the end of this module. Mill does think, yes, there are definitely strong feelings when it comes to justice, without a doubt. Justice does rest on some pretty powerful and deep emotions that people have. I mean, think fairness in children, right? Powerful. Every child, it's not fair. It's just born into us, this idea of fairness and justice. And so we do have strong emotions associated with that. And he does say, yeah, we don't seem to have the same strong feelings when it comes to utility and happiness, and not the way like justice does. And indeed, if you go back to the text, back to page 216, let's look on page 216 there. Mill is quick to note that there is a problem with these strong feelings of justice. He says on page 216, quote, that a feeling is bestowed on us by nature does not necessarily legitimate all of its promptings. So what he's saying here, yeah, our feelings for justice seem pretty natural, and maybe they are natural. Maybe evolution or something has implanted these ideas, whatever. But he says just because they're natural, though, it would be a mistake to assume that just because something is natural, that it's then morally right, correct, or whatever. This might sound familiar from when we talked about natural law. Just because something's natural, as Mill says, doesn't mean we have to do everything it says. Because look, we all know we get angry at stuff. We have strong emotional responses where we get angry. And yeah, we can make mistakes often when we get angry. I mean, think about, the problem with vigilante justice, right? The idea that vigilante justice, where the people come together like, we got to punish, we're going to skip the police. We're going to take care of justice ourselves. And vigilante justice has these problems where, because people are so emotionally angry, they end up often harming the wrong person. They go after the wrong person completely. Or if they even get lucky and catch the right person, they often do way more damage to that person than what was deserved. The punishment is too much for the crime because the emotion messes things up. And so the point here that Mill is making, yes, absolutely, our emotions are connected with justice, but our emotions are probably not enough to determine what justice actually requires. Again, vigilantes are driven by strong emotions about what justice requires, but those emotions cause the vigilantes to be unjust. Again, punish the wrong person or give too harsh of a punishment. So that's the paradox. Our strong feelings of emotion, our strong emotions or strong feelings about justice may cause us to act unjustly. Ooh. I don't know. I think that's cool. So John Stuart Mill believes we need something, and he's going to provide it by the end for sure. Something that will guide our emotion. We need reason to help these emotions to make sure that when we're following justice, we're doing so correctly and not being led astray by our emotions to actions that are unjust. Again, go back to page 216. 216, once again, one more time. Here on page 216, we can see Mill. He says, the feelings of justice might be a peculiar instinct and might yet require, like our other instincts, to be controlled and enlightened by a higher reason. So he's saying just what I just said there, is that, yes, powerful emotions needs guidance to make sure it's done. And so, of course, Mill's going to say, yes, very powerful and important emotions associated with justice, but we need a corrective. We need a corrective so we correctly carry out justice and don't get led astray into injustice. And, well, what corrective from reason, what rule, what principle could Mill be thinking of that would help our emotions and help with justice? Well, he is a utilitarian, so you can probably guess that this principle, this rule he's going to provide will, yes, by the end, we will see it will be the principle of utility. Mr. Green, where is he? Mr. Green, tell us what that principle is one more time.
We should act always so as to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. This is known as the principle of utility.
Thank you, Mr. Green. He's lovely, isn't he, people? Yes, John Stuart Mill is saying justice will be natural. He's going to explain this. How it's natural, how it arises in our very deep emotions. So that sense it's natural. But justice requires reason, requires a corrective, and that corrective will be the principle of utility. And so in doing all of this, Mill wants to show how utilitarianism can indeed be reconciled with our notions about justice and especially our notions about rights. So the trick here to show is how all those commonsensical things about legal rights, impartiality, moral rights, fairness, desert, how all those common sense ideas we have about justice, how Mill can make those align with utility, how utilitarianism will actually promote those things instead of threaten those things. Because remember, last module was how utilitarianism seemed to threaten our rights and threaten justice and make us break, do all the bad stuff. Mill does not want that to happen. Mill was very sensitive. He wanted justice to be justice and not go bad. And so seeing those examples, he would be heartbroken. He'd be like, no, let me help you. But he also knows this is a tall order. He knows that this is not a trivial thing he wants to show about how those examples we saw in the previous module are mistaken. They don't understand utilitarianism correctly. So, I'll walk you through it, though. We're going to spend a lot of time with the text this time, so probably print it out or have a copy available. I really do want to walk through this text because it's important. And I do like, I like Mill. He's for the writers we read in this class, he's actually pretty good. Anyway, so what's our agenda? Well, I'm going to begin as Mill does by fleshing out the role of justice within morality. After that, we'll see how Mill uses that role. And this is kind of cool. He's going to use that role to lay out the components of justice. We're going to see some cool stuff there about the emotions and things. That's great. And then finally, we'll see how Mill will put all that stuff together. Again, what's justice do? What are its components? And how once he's clarified all that, he can then resolve the tension between utilitarianism and justice. So there it is. That's our agenda for this module. I do want to say, look, for just thinking about this. Mill is still a utilitarian. At the end of the day, the greater good, the promotion of utility and happiness, that is all that matters to Mill. He is a utilitarian. The principle of utility is the greatest good for the greatest number. That's his bean. Bean? His baby. His bean. I can't edit that out easily. Anyway, Mill is going to say that justice and rights, while important, they have value, but they will only have instrumental value. That is, justice and rights are only valuable to the extent that they promote happiness and greater utility. If they fail to do that, then they're out the window. So just keep that in mind during this, because are you comfortable? I think this is such a key question. Are you comfortable with your rights? Because I assume you think you have rights to some things. Do your rights get their value because your rights are promoting greater happiness, greater utility for everyone? Maybe you see it, maybe you don't. I don't know. We'll see what Mill thinks they do, obviously. So we'll see if you agree with him by the end. Because after all, the greater good, may giveth, but does that mean it can taketh away when the utility in the math doesn't work? But in any case, have that in the question in the back of your mind as we're going through Mill's argument. However, now, before doing all of that, I think I've laid out everything in agonizing detail, but maybe that helps. Let's take that quick break. And then when we come back, we'll get started.